My name is Mackenzie Wright, and at 34, I thought I had everything figured out. A successful marketing executive with a corner office in Boston, I never expected my carefully constructed life to unravel so quickly. When burnout hit me like a freight train, I fled to my grandfather's mountain lodge in Vermont, my sanctuary and peace. What I found instead was my younger sister, Brooke, her husband, Ryan, and his entire family who had moved in without my knowledge. Before I dive into how my sanctuary was invaded, drop a comment about your own safe place. Have you ever had someone violate your personal space? Hit subscribe and join me on this wild family drama that changed everything. The signs of burnout had been there for months, but I was too stubborn to notice them. Sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford, and the migraines were getting more frequent. As senior marketing director at Precision Brands, I'd built a reputation for handling impossible deadlines and difficult clients. Mackenzie never cracks under pressure. My boss Nathan would boast during meetings. That was before the Johnson account disaster. After 6 months of meticulous planning, thousands of work hours, and a pitch I'd rehearsed until I could recite it in my sleep, the Johnson executives pulled out at the last minute. They went with our competitors, taking a potential 7-figure contract with them. Nobody blamed me directly, the decision was purely political, everyone said, but I knew the loss reflected poorly on my team and, by extension, on me. 2 days after the Johnson fiasco, I found myself staring blankly at my computer screen, unable to remember what I was supposed to be working on. When my assistant Madison found me in the same position 45 minutes later, she gently suggested I talk to Nathan about taking some time off. The lodge, I remember whispering to myself. Just the thought of my grandfather's mountain retreat sent a wave of calm through my body. The property wasn't grand by any stretch of the imagination, but it was magical to me. Nestled in the Green Mountains of Vermont, the 3-bedroom log cabin sat on 5 acres of wooded land with a small lake nearby. My grandfather Walter had built it himself in the 1,970 seconds, spending years perfecting every detail. The stone fireplace in the living room, the hand-carved banisters, the reading nook under the stairs, each element spoke of his craftsmanship and love. Growing up, I'd spent every summer at the lodge with him after my parents' divorce. While my mother worked multiple jobs to keep us afloat and my sister Brooke bounced between summer camps and friends' houses, I found stability in the mountains with Grandpa Walter. He taught me to fish in the lake, to identify edible plants in the forest, to track wildlife by their prints. Self-reliance is freedom, Kenzie, he'd say, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. Know your true north, and you'll never be lost. When he passed away 5 years ago, the lodge came to me. My mother thought it was unfair. Shouldn't the property be split between both granddaughters? But Walter's will was clear. The lodge was mine alone. With a letter explaining his decision, Kenzie appreciated this place in a way no one else did. She'll protect its spirit. And I had. I'd maintained the property meticulously, only updating what was absolutely necessary. A new water heater, reinforced roof supports, modern insulation. Everything else remained as Walter had built it. I visited as often as my schedule allowed, usually once every 2 months for a long weekend. The lodge was my refuge, my reset button, my sanctuary. My relationship with Brooke had always been complicated. 2 years younger than me, she'd been the free spirit to my responsible planner. As children, we'd been close despite our differences. I'd help her with homework. She'd drag me into adventures. But after our parents' divorce, something shifted. While I retreated into academic achievement and responsibility, Brooke sought attention through increasingly chaotic behavior. In adulthood, the pattern continued. I built a stable career. Brooke bounced between jobs. I saved for retirement. Brooke accumulated credit card debt. I maintained long-term relationships. Brooke fell in and out of love monthly, until Ryan Bennett. When Brooke met him 3 years ago, I actually felt hopeful. Ryan was charming and ambitious, with big dreams of launching his own adventure tourism company. For the first time, Brooke seemed to settle down. They married after just 6 months impulsive, but that was Brooke, and moved into an apartment in Providence. Our relationship became even more strained after the wedding. Ryan seemed uncomfortable around me, perhaps sensing my reservations about him. Brooke became defensive whenever I asked about their plans or finances. Our once-monthly dinners dwindled to holiday gatherings only. Still, I made efforts to stay connected. When they moved apartments last year, I gave Brooke a spare key to the lodge for emergencies only. "If you ever need a weekend away, call first, but it's there for you," I told her. I never imagined she'd interpret this as an open invitation to move in. The 5-hour drive from Boston to the lodge that Friday afternoon should have been therapeutic. I watched the urban landscape give way to suburbs, then farmland, then finally the densely forested mountains. With each mile, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. By the time I turned onto the private road leading to the lodge, I was already fantasizing about a hot bath and the bottle of Cabernet I'd brought with me. The first sign that something was wrong came when I rounded the final bend. Instead of the empty clearing I expected, the gravel driveway was filled with vehicles. A silver SUV I didn't recognize, an old blue pickup truck, and a red sedan that looked vaguely familiar. For a moment, I wondered if I'd somehow gotten the wrong property, but the hand-carved Right Lodge sign my grandfather had made confirmed I was in the right place. My confusion turned to alarm when I saw smoke rising from the chimney. Had someone broken in? Should I call the police? I parked behind the red sedan, blocking it in, and approached the lodge cautiously. That's when I noticed the curtains in the front windows had been changed from the blue checkered ones I'd hung to floral prints I'd never seen before. Anger replacing fear, I unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The scene that greeted me seemed surreal. My sister Brooke was curled up on my couch, which had been moved to the opposite wall, while a middle-aged woman I'd never met arranged flowers on the dining table. From the kitchen came the sounds of clattering pots and male voices. "Mackenzie!" Brooke jumped up, her expression shifting rapidly from shock to a forced brightness. "Surprise! What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, the kitchen door swung open and 3 people emerged. Ryan carrying a beer, an older man with Ryan's same square jawline, and a younger man who looked like Ryan's slightly shorter copy. All froze when they saw me standing in the doorway, still clutching my overnight bag and the bottle of wine. "Who?" I managed to say through clenched teeth. "Are all these people in my house?" "Mackenzie, this is unexpected." Ryan recovered first, setting his beer down on the coffee table directly on the wood, without a coaster. "We thought you'd be working through the weekend." "Clearly," I replied, stepping fully into the lodge and closing the door behind me. The familiar space felt alien with all these strangers in it. "You still haven't answered my question. Who are all these people?" Brooke hurried forward, her nervous energy palpable. "Let me introduce everyone. This is Ryan's mom, Judith." She gestured to the woman with the flowers, who gave a tight smile. "That's his dad, Harold," the older man nodded curtly, "and his brother, Marcus." The younger copy of Ryan raised his beer bottle in a mock salute. "Family visit?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the lived-in look of the place. The stack of magazines on the side table wasn't recent arrivals. The shoes lined up by the door weren't for a day trip. "Well, not exactly." Brooke twisted her hands together, a childhood habit that emerged when she was about to confess something. "We're actually staying here for a little while." "Define a little while," I said, my voice dangerously calm. Ryan stepped forward, putting his arm around Brooke. "Maybe we should all sit down and talk about this. Judith, Harold, why don't you give us some space?" "This is awkward," Marcus muttered, not moving from his spot. "I'd like everyone to stay, actually," I countered, setting my bag down deliberately. "Since you're all living in my house, apparently I'd like to hear the full story from everyone involved." An uncomfortable silence fell, as everyone found seats, Brooke and Ryan on the couch, his parents in the armchairs I'd reupholstered last year, Marcus leaning against the wall, and me standing alone facing them all. "We've had some setbacks," Ryan began in what I recognized as his business pitch voice. "My company had some unexpected challenges, and we had to downsize our living situation." "What Ryan means," Brooke interrupted, her eyes already welling with tears, is that we lost our apartment. The business failed, Mackenzie. We lost almost everything. Despite my anger, a pang of sympathy hit me. Brooke had been genuinely excited about Ryan's adventure tourism startup, investing not just her emotional support but also, I suspected, the small inheritance she'd received from our grandmother. The timing couldn't have been worse, Ryan continued. My parents had just sold their house to downsize, but their new condo wasn't ready yet. And Marcus had been staying with us after his company did layoffs. So you all decided to move into my lodge without asking? I clarified, my sympathy giving way to indignation. We did try to call you, Brooke insisted, though her gaze dropped to the floor. You were busy with that big account. I left messages. Vague messages about needing to talk. Not about planning to move into my house, I countered. How long have you been here? Brooke and Ryan exchanged glances. 3 weeks, Harold spoke up, his gruff voice cutting through the tension. And we're grateful for the roof over our heads, even if the accommodations are more rustic than we're accustomed to. I bit back a sharp retort. The rustic accommodations had been my sanctuary, my inheritance, my private retreat, and they'd been living here for nearly a month without my knowledge or consent. You used the emergency key I gave you, I said to Brooke, the betrayal settling heavily in my chest. We had nowhere else to go, Mackenzie, she pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. Mom's place is too small, and all our friends are in one-bedrooms or studios. This place has been sitting empty most of the time anyway. It's not empty. It's mine, I said, my voice tight. And you should have asked. Would you have said yes? Ryan challenged, a defensive edge to his tone. Before I could answer, Judith chimed in. Family helps family in times of need. I'm sure your grandfather would have wanted you to share this place with your sister. The presumption of this woman, a stranger telling me what my grandfather would have wanted, felt like a physical blow. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper wouldn't improve the situation. How long are you planning to stay? I asked instead. Another exchange of glances between Brooke and Ryan. Just until we get back on our feet, Brooke said quickly. A few weeks, maybe a month or two. Just until Ryan's new business partnership comes through and his parents' condo is ready. My mental arithmetic told me they'd already blown through whatever safety net they had. If they'd been here 3 weeks already and had no immediate prospects, a month or two was optimistic at best, delusional at worst. We'll be out of your hair before you know it, Ryan added with a confidence I didn't trust. We've been taking good care of the place. Brooke remembered how particular you are about everything. I scanned the room, noting all the changes already made. Furniture rearranged, my grandfather's hand-knotted rug replaced with a cheap synthetic one, unfamiliar decorative items on the mantel where my family photos should have been. The care I'd taken to preserve Walter's vision had been casually undone. Where are you sleeping? I asked, suddenly realizing I'd need a place to stay myself. We took the master bedroom, Judith answered, not a hint of apology in her voice. Harold's back requires a proper mattress, and yours is the only decent one in the house. My grandfather's bedroom. My bedroom when I visited. The one room I'd kept exactly as it had been when he was alive, down to the hand-carved bed frame he'd made himself. Marcus is in the blue room, and Brooke and Ryan have the sunroom, Judith continued. We cleared out all those dusty old books to make space for a proper bed in there. My reading room. My grandfather's book collection. Cleared out? I must have looked as stricken as I felt because Brooke quickly jumped in. We just boxed them up, Mac. They're safe in the attic. We can bring them back down any time. The casual displacement of my belongings, the invasion of my most private spaces, the presumption that they could simply rearrange my life to accommodate theirs, it was overwhelming. Yet here I was, exhausted from weeks of stress at work, standing in my own home with nowhere to sleep. You can take the guest room, Brooke offered, as if doing me a favor. We haven't been using it except for storage. Storage. In my own house. I should have demanded they leave immediately. I should have called the police to report trespassers. I should have stood my ground. But decades of being the responsible one, of smoothing things over, of taking care of Brooke kicked in automatically. This is temporary, I said finally, my voice leaving no room for argument. Very temporary. We'll talk about a concrete timeline tomorrow after I've had some rest. Of course, Ryan agreed too quickly. We're just grateful for your understanding. Understanding wasn't what I was feeling as I carried my overnight bag to the small guest room, only to find it cluttered with boxes, random furniture, and what appeared to be Harold's extensive fishing gear collection. I cleared just enough space for my suitcase and sat on the edge of the twin bed, listening to the muffled sounds of my intruders, resuming their evening as if nothing had happened. In the quiet of that small room, surrounded by other people's belongings, I allowed myself a moment of pure, burning fury. Then, like I always did, I packed the anger away and began figuring out how to solve the problem before me. I woke early the next morning, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling above me. For a moment, I couldn't place where I was not my Boston apartment, not the master bedroom of the lodge. Then the events of the previous evening came flooding back, along with a renewed sense of violation. A glance at my watch showed 5:45 a.m. The house was still quiet, everyone else apparently asleep. I slipped out of the guest room and into the kitchen, desperate for coffee and a moment of peace before facing the Bennett family again. Even the kitchen had been transformed. My organized, minimalist space was now cluttered with unfamiliar appliances, decorative canisters, and a magnetic knife strip attached to the wall screwed in. I noticed with a spike of anger, without my permission, the refrigerator, once nearly empty between my visits, was now packed with food, including several six-packs of beer that occupied the entire bottom shelf. I searched the cabinets for my coffee, only to find it had been relegated to the back of the pantry. My favorite mug, a handmade ceramic piece Walter had bought at a local artist's fair, was nowhere to be found. Looking for this? Judith's voice startled me. She stood in the doorway in a pink quilted robe, holding my mug. Pretty thing, but the handle's a bit awkward. I've managed just fine for years, I replied, taking it from her with what I hoped was a neutral expression. I reorganized the cabinets, she continued, moving to the coffee maker, not mine, I noticed, but a fancier version that now occupied my counter space. Nothing made sense the way you had it. Who puts plates on the bottom shelves? I do, I said simply. It's my kitchen. Judith gave me a look that might have been pity. Well, it works better this way. The flow is much more intuitive now. Rather than argue, I made my coffee and retreated to the back porch, one of the few places that seemed untouched by the Bennett invasion. The crisp morning air helped clear my head as I watched the sun rise over the mountains, trying to recapture some of the peace this place usually gave me. My solitude didn't last long. Within an hour, the house was alive with activity. Harold emerged from the master bedroom and headed straight for the garage, where I discovered he'd set up an impromptu workshop among my gardening supplies and winter equipment. Marcus commandeered the living room, sprawled across the couch with his laptop and headphones, some kind of video game blasting loudly enough that I could hear it across the room. He's applying for jobs, Brooke explained when she saw my expression. The gaming helps him relax between submissions. By mid-morning, I'd conducted a full assessment of the changes to my property, each discovery more infuriating than the last. The den had been converted into what Ryan called his temporary office, with my desk pushed against the wall to make room for his larger setup. The linen closet had been emptied of my carefully selected sheets and towels, replaced with the Bennett's mismatched collection. Even the medicine cabinet in the bathroom contained unfamiliar prescriptions and toiletries, my own items crammed into a corner. We need to talk, I told Brooke when I finally tracked her down in the laundry room. All of us, about how long you're planning to stay and what boundaries need to be established. Can it wait until after lunch? She asked, not meeting my eyes. Ryan and his dad are planning to grill, and it's supposed to be a nice family meal. That's exactly my point, Brooke. This isn't their family home. It's my house, which you're staying in temporarily. Don't be so possessive, Mac. It's just a house. It's not just a house, I countered, my patience wearing thin. It's Grandpa Walter's legacy. It's my private space that you've invaded without permission. And now you've moved my things, rearranged my kitchen, screwed things into my walls, and acted like I'm the unreasonable one for having concerns. Fine, she sighed. After lunch, we'll talk. I promise. The family lunch was an awkward affair on the back deck. Harold had taken over the grill, my grill, and was holding court about the proper way to cook a steak. Judith had prepared several elaborate side dishes using produce from that little farmer's market in town, speaking as if she'd discovered it herself rather than benefiting from the recommendation list I kept in the kitchen drawer. Throughout the meal, I became increasingly aware of how the Bennetts had established themselves as the primary residents, with me cast in the role of visitor. They had inside jokes about the lodge, references to events that had happened during their 3-week stay, and a comfortable familiarity with the space that made my skin crawl. We had the Henderson couple over last weekend. Judith mentioned casually passing the salad. Lovely people from 2 properties over. They brought that delicious blackberry pie. You've been having guests? I asked, setting down my fork. Just the neighbors, Ryan said quickly. Being friendly, you know. Community building. In my house. Without my knowledge or permission, an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. It's not like you were using the place, Marcus muttered, breaking the tension. From what Brooke says, you barely come up here anyway. That's not the point, I began. But Harold cut me off. Look, Mackenzie, we appreciate you letting us stay here, but there's no need to make a federal case out of a little neighborly hospitality. The Hendersons think very highly of you now, after we told them how generous you're being with your family. My family. As if the Bennetts had any claim to that title beyond Ryan's marriage to my sister. After lunch, I reminded Brooke, who nodded nervously, but after lunch turned into helping clean up, which turned into Judith insisting I look at the changes she wanted to make to the flower beds, which turned into Ryan asking for my professional opinion on his new business website. By late afternoon, I realized the conversation was being deliberately delayed. Finally, I'd had enough. I was heading to the den to get my laptop when I noticed the door to the storage closet under the stairs was ajar. Curious, I opened it fully, expecting to find more of the Bennett's belongings. Instead, I found boxes labeled Mackenzie's things and Walter's stuff stacked haphazardly. With growing dread, I opened the top box to find my grandfather's hand-carved chess set wrapped carelessly in newspaper. Beneath it were the family photos that should have been on the mantel, the small collection of river stones he'd helped me gather as a child, and the journal I kept at the lodge to record wildlife sightings. These weren't just possessions. They were physical connections to Walter, to my childhood, to the very soul of the lodge. And they'd been boxed up and hidden away to make room for Judith's mass-produced decorations and Harold's fishing magazines. I must have made a sound, because suddenly Brooke was beside me, her expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. We needed the space, she said before I could speak. There was so much clutter. This isn't clutter, I said, my voice dangerously quiet as I held up the chess set. This is my history. Our history, Brooke. Grandpa Walter made this. It was just sitting there gathering dust. She shrugged. No one was using it. That's not the point. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. You don't get to decide what matters in my house. You don't get to pack away my memories because they don't fit your aesthetic. You're overreacting, Brooke crossed her arms. It's just stuff. We didn't throw it away. We just stored it safely. Like you stored his books and my hiking gear and apparently every personal item that indicated this was my home and not yours? Our raised voices had attracted the attention of the others. Ryan appeared in the hallway, followed closely by his parents. Everything okay here? He asked, his tone suggesting that I was the one causing problems. No, everything is not okay, I replied. I want to know exactly what your plans are. How long do you intend to stay here? What steps are you taking to find your own place? Because this arrangement isn't working. The looks exchanged among the 4 Bennetts told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't been making plans to leave. If anything, they'd been settling in more permanently. We're still getting back on our feet, Ryan hedged. The business partnership is taking a little longer than expected to finalize. And our condo won't be ready until at least December, Judith added. December, I echoed. It's May. You expect to live in my house for 7 more months? Well, we can't exactly live in our car, can we? Harold's tone was accusatory, as if I'd suggested something unreasonable. I retreated to the guest room soon after, unable to continue the conversation without saying something I might regret. I needed perspective, a voice of reason outside this bizarre situation. I called my best friend Alana, keeping my voice low to avoid being overheard. They did what? She exclaimed when I explained the situation. Girl, you need to kick them out. Today. Change the locks. It's not that simple, I sighed. It's Brooke. She's my sister. A sister who moved into your house without permission and is letting her in-laws take over your space, Alana countered. Family doesn't excuse bad behavior, Mac. I know. But she really doesn't have anywhere else to go. That's not your problem to solve. It's hers. And Ryan's. You're enabling them by letting this continue. Deep down, I knew she was right. My relationship with Brooke had always followed this pattern. She created chaos, I cleaned it up. She acted impulsively. I provided the safety net. She took, I gave. But knowing the pattern and breaking it were two different things. Just set some clear boundaries, Alana advised. Give them a firm move-out date. And for God's sake, take back your bedroom. It's your house. After the call, I tried to work on my laptop, needing to check emails even during this so-called break. But the internet was frustratingly slow. When I checked the router, I discovered multiple devices connected, including Marcus's gaming console that was clearly hogging the bandwidth. Dinner that evening was another tense affair, with conversation carefully steered away from any mention of plans or timelines. Instead, the Bennetts discussed their day as if they were permanent residents. Judith's plans for rearranging the flower beds, Harold's project to fix the perfectly functional shed door, Ryan's ideas for updating the living room furniture. I've been thinking we should repaint this summer, Judith mused, looking critically at the walls. This color is so dated. The lodge doesn't need repainting, I said firmly. And if it did, that would be my decision, not yours. Just a suggestion, she replied with a thin smile. Since we'll be here anyway. The casual assumption that they would still be here anyway in summer months from now was the last straw. I excused myself from the table, retreated to the guest room, and spent the evening researching tenant laws in Vermont on my phone, since the internet was still unusably slow. The next morning, I woke early again, determined to have some time alone by the lake. As I passed the living room on my way out, I noticed my laptop open on the coffee table, not where I'd left it the night before. Someone had been using my computer. I checked the browser history and found searches for best schools in Vermont, winter activities near Bennington, and contractors for kitchen renovation. There were also several pages open on real estate listings for properties similar to the lodge. The Bennetts weren't planning to leave. They were planning to stay indefinitely, and apparently considering renovations to my home without my permission. This wasn't just an imposition anymore. This was an occupation. 5 days into what should have been my peaceful retreat, I was more stressed than when I'd left Boston. Every corner of the lodge held a new territorial dispute. Judith rearranging my pantry because my organization didn't make sense. Harold installing shelves in the garage without asking. Marcus leaving his dirty dishes and gaming equipment scattered across the living room. Brooke and Ryan had mastered the art of strategic avoidance, somehow always busy when I tried to pin them down for a serious conversation about their plans. The promised talk after lunch never materialized, nor did subsequent attempts to establish boundaries or timelines. That afternoon, I decided to escape the tension with a long hike on my favorite trail. The 4-mile loop around the lake had always been my thinking spot, the place where I'd gone as a teenager to sort through problems and clear my head. If any place could help me figure out how to handle this situation, it was there. The solitude worked its magic. With each step on the familiar path, my thoughts became clearer. I needed to be firm but fair. I would offer Brooke and Ryan only them, not the entire Bennett clan, the opportunity to stay for 1 month while they secured alternative housing. I would reclaim the master bedroom immediately. And I would establish clear rules about respecting my property and possessions. It seemed like a reasonable compromise, one that acknowledged Brooke's difficult circumstances while protecting my own boundaries. By the time I completed the loop and headed back toward the lodge, I felt more confident in my approach. That confidence evaporated the moment I stepped into the clearing and saw at least a dozen cars parked haphazardly around the property. Music thumped from inside the lodge, and the voices of strangers drifted from the back deck. They were having a party in my house, without my knowledge or consent. I pushed through the front door to find my living room transformed. The furniture had been pushed against the walls to create a makeshift dance floor. Strangers lounged on my couch, drinks in hand, condensation rings already forming on the wooden coffee table. Someone had set up a makeshift bar on my grandfather's antique sideboard. Bottles crowded together on the delicate surface. Mackenzie! Brooke spotted me from across the room. She wore a dress I'd never seen before, her cheeks flushed with what I suspected was more than just excitement. "You're back. Come meet everyone." "What is this?" I demanded, not moving from the doorway. "Just a little get-together," she said, grabbing my arm and pulling me further inside. "Ryan's potential business partners are here, and we thought it would be nice to show them the property." "The property," I repeated. "My property." "Don't be like that," she whispered, though her smile remained fixed. This could be huge for Ryan's new venture. These guys have serious capital to invest. Before I could respond, a tall man with an expensive-looking watch approached us. "Drink in hand." "You must be the sister," he said, looking me up and down in a way that made my skin crawl. "Ryan says you're quite the successful businesswoman yourself." "Mackenzie Wright," I said stiffly, not offering my hand. "And this is my house." "Beautiful place," he nodded, seemingly oblivious to my discomfort. "Great potential." Ryan was just showing us the lake access, prime spot for the adventure tourism base he's planning. My head snapped toward Brooke, who suddenly found the floor fascinating. "Excuse us," I said to the man, grabbing Brooke's arm and pulling her toward the kitchen. The kitchen was no better than the living room. People crowded around the island, where several bottles of my expensive wine bottles I'd been saving for special occasions stood open. Someone was smoking by the open window, despite the fact that I had asthma and had always maintained a strict no-smoking policy indoors. "What is he talking about?" I demanded once we were in a relatively quiet corner. "What adventure tourism base?" Brooke bit her lip. "It's just an idea Ryan's exploring, using the lodge as a home base for his new company. These investors are really interested in the location. Using my lodge? Without asking me? Are you out of your mind?" "It wouldn't change anything," she insisted. "You'd still own it. We'd just be operating from here, bringing in clients for hiking, fishing, kayaking." "No," I cut her off. "Absolutely not. This is my private residence, not a commercial property. And you had no right to even suggest it as a possibility without talking to me first." Our heated discussion was interrupted by a crash from the living room, followed by laughter. I pushed past Brooke to find that someone had knocked over a floor lamp, my grandmother's lamp, one of the few pieces I had from her. "That's it," I announced loudly, moving to the stereo and shutting off the music. "Party's over. Everyone who doesn't live here needs to leave. Now." A confused silence fell over the room. Ryan appeared from the deck, his expression shifting rapidly from confusion to anger when he saw me. "Mackenzie, what are you doing?" he hissed, approaching quickly. "These are important connections." "I don't care if they're the royal family," I replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is my house, and I didn't authorize this gathering. I want everyone out." "You're overreacting," Ryan's voice hardened. "It's just a casual get-together. We're just showing a little hospitality. With my house, my wine, my family heirlooms that are being broken by strangers." I gestured to the lamp, now being haphazardly reassembled by an embarrassed-looking guest. "It's just a lamp," Brooke interjected, coming to stand beside Ryan. "Don't be so uptight, Mac." "Uptight?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. I come home to find a party in my house, with people smoking inside despite my asthma, drinking my wine, breaking my possessions, and discussing business plans involving my property that no one bothered to mention to me, and I'm being uptight? The guests began to gather their belongings, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding drama. The man with the expensive watch gave Ryan a significant look before heading for the door, followed by several others. "You've ruined everything," Ryan snapped once most of the guests had departed. "Those investors were seriously interested. In a business, you have no right to operate from my property," I countered. "We were going to talk to you about it," Brooke insisted. "Once things were more concrete, like you were going to talk to me about moving in? Or about rearranging my entire house? Or about boxing up my personal belongings?" By now, only the Bennett family remained in the living room, watching our confrontation like spectators at a tennis match. "I think Mackenzie is being quite unreasonable," Judith offered from her perch on the arm of the sofa. "After all, we've opened our home to her." "Your home?" I whirled on her. "This is my house, my inheritance, my private property that you've all invaded without permission." "Now see here." Harold stood up, his voice gruff. "We've been nothing but grateful for your hospitality, but family helps family. And you've been acting like we're inconveniencing you." "You are inconveniencing me. You've taken over my house, displaced my belongings, used my resources, planned business ventures using my property, and thrown parties without my permission. And now you have the audacity to act offended when I object?" "You've always been selfish," Brooke said, the words hitting like a physical blow. "Always so protective of your things, your space, your perfect little life. Would it kill you to share for once? To help your family when we need it?" "I have always helped you," I countered, my voice cracking slightly. "I've loaned you money, helped you move, supported you through every crisis. But this isn't helping, this is taking advantage." "We need to stay through the winter at least," Ryan announced suddenly. "Changing tactics. I've already told my boss we've relocated permanently. The business partnership is contingent on having a local base of operations." "Permanently?" I echoed, the word hanging heavily in the air. "Well, for the foreseeable future," he amended quickly. "Until we get established." "And what about your parents? And Marcus? Are they part of this permanent relocation too?" "We're all family now," Judith said smoothly. "And this place has plenty of room for everyone." "That's not your decision to make," I replied, my calm returning as the true scope of their presumption became clear. "None of you are staying permanently. In fact, I want everyone out by the end of the week." A heavy silence fell over the room. "You can't do that," Brooke finally said, her voice small. "We have nowhere else to go. You should have thought about that before you moved into my house without permission, threw parties without my consent, and planned to use my property for commercial purposes without consulting me." "There's something you should know," Brooke said, exchanging a look with Ryan. "About the lodge. About Grandpa Walter." A sense of dread pooled in my stomach. "What about him?" "He promised it to both of us," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "He told me before he died that the lodge would be a place for both his granddaughters, always, that we would share it." The lie was so blatant, so contrary to everything I knew about my grandfather and his explicit wishes, that for a moment I couldn't even respond. "That's not true," I finally managed. His will was very clear. "Wills can be contested," Ryan interjected smoothly, "especially when there's evidence of verbal promises made to other parties. They were threatening me, using my grandfather's memory as leverage to claim a property that was never meant for them." "You're lying," I said, my voice steadied despite the storm of emotions inside me. "Walter would never have promised you the lodge. He knew how much it meant to me, and how little it meant to you. You always were his favorite." Brooke's voice was bitter. "But he loved me too. He wanted me to have a place here. As a guest, maybe. Not as an owner. Not as someone who would change everything he built and treasured." "Well, it doesn't really matter what he wanted now, does it?" Marcus chimed in, his tone dismissive. "The point is, we're here now and we're not going anywhere." The finality of his statement, the collective entitlement emanating from the Bennett family, and the betrayal in Brooke's eyes as she stood united with them against me. It all became too much. Without another word, I grabbed my purse and car keys and walked out the front door. Behind me, I heard Judith say, "She'll calm down eventually. They always do." But they didn't know me as well as they thought. I wasn't coming back until I had a plan to reclaim what was mine. The Pinewood Motel sat just off the main highway, its faded sign and cracked parking lot a far cry from the comfort of my lodge. But at 11 o'clock at night, with nowhere else to go and a desperate need for distance from the Bennetts, it was a sanctuary of sorts. The room was basic: a queen bed with a sagging mattress, a dresser with a small TV, a bathroom with inconsistent water pressure. But it was clean, it was private, and most importantly, it was mine, even if only for the night. I sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the evening replaying in my mind. The party, the strangers in my home, the revelation of Ryan's plans to use my property for his business, and worst of all, Brooke's lie about our grandfather's wishes. A betrayal so profound it left me physically ill. Sleep eluded me. I spent the night alternating between furious pacing and periods of numb disbelief. By morning, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones, but my mind remained a churning sea of emotions. I called Nathan at the office, explaining that my restful break had hit some complications and I needed to extend my time off. To his credit, he didn't ask questions, simply approved the additional week and reminded me that my team could handle things in my absence. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd come to the lodge to recover from burnout, only to find myself more stressed, more exhausted, and now effectively homeless. After a shower that alternated between scalding and freezing, I ventured out to find coffee and figure out my next steps. The Mountain View Diner offered both caffeine and free Wi-Fi, two essentials for my current situation. "You look like you've had a rough night," the waitress, Linda, according to her name tag, commented as she refilled my cup for the third time. "Is it that obvious?" I attempted a smile. "Honey, I've been serving coffee in this town for 20 years. I know the look of someone who's carrying troubles." She set the pot down and leaned against the booth. "You're the right girl, aren't you? Walter's granddaughter." I nodded, surprised to be recognized. "Thought so. You have his eyes." She glanced around the nearly empty diner, then slid into the seat across from me. "I knew your grandfather pretty well. Good man. Used to come in every Saturday morning for blueberry pancakes." The mention of this small detail, one I hadn't known, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "He never mentioned that." "Some things you just do for yourself," Linda shrugged. "A little routine, a moment of peace." I was sorry to hear when he passed. "Thank you," I managed, blinking back tears. "I've seen your sister and her husband's family around town lately," she continued, watching me carefully. "They've been telling folks they're helping you manage the property now that you're too busy with your city job." Another betrayal. They'd been presenting themselves as caretakers, as if I'd willingly handed over responsibility for my grandfather's legacy. "That's not accurate," I said carefully. Linda nodded as if she'd suspected as much. "And now they're talking about turning it into some kind of tourist spot. Guided expeditions, luxury wilderness retreats, that sort of thing." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. They have no right to make those plans. I figured as much. Walter was pretty clear about wanting that place kept as it was. "Some pieces of the world should stay wild," he used to say. The quote so perfectly capturing my grandfather's philosophy was like a punch to the chest. The Bennetts weren't just taking my property. They were erasing Walter's vision, his values, everything the lodge represented. "Thank you for telling me this," I said, genuinely grateful despite the pain the information caused. I needed to know. After leaving the diner, I drove to the local law office I'd found online. Michael Ross, attorney at law, occupied a small storefront on Main Street, sandwiched between a hardware store and a bakery. The office was modest but professional, with bookcases lining the walls and a desk free of clutter. Michael himself was younger than I expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "So, Miss Wright, He said after I'd explained my situation. The good news is that legally, you're on very solid ground. The lodge is solely in your name, your sister has no claim to it, and her husband's family are essentially squatters. And the bad news? I asked, recognizing the tone. Evicting family members can be complicated and time-consuming. Even without a lease, they could be considered tenants under Vermont law, which means a formal eviction process. How long would that take? Best case scenario? A few weeks. Worst case, if they contest it and drag things out? Months. Months. The thought of the Bennetts remaining in my lodge for months, further entrenching themselves and their plans, was unbearable. What about the fact that they entered without permission? Doesn't that count for anything? You gave your sister a key, Michael reminded me gently, and you haven't reported them to the police for trespassing. From a legal perspective, you've implicitly allowed them to stay by not taking immediate action. I left the lawyer's office with a folder full of information about formal eviction notices and a growing sense of despair. The legal system, designed to protect tenants from sudden homelessness, was working against me in this case. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a notification. Brooke had tagged me in a social media post, something she rarely did given our limited online interaction. Curious, I opened the app. The photo showed Brooke and Ryan standing proudly on the back deck of the lodge, the lake gleaming behind them. The caption read, "Excited to announce our newest venture, Green Mountain Adventure Retreats. Thanks to my amazing sister for believing in our dream and partnering with us on this journey. Number family business number, adventure tourism number, Vermont living." I stared at the screen, numb with shock. They hadn't just invaded my home. They were now publicly claiming I supported and was partnering in their business venture. The comments section was filled with congratulations and questions about booking information. It was a calculated move. By publicly announcing the business with me tagged as a willing participant, they were creating a narrative that would be difficult to dispute without causing a very public family rift. Sitting in my parked car, I scrolled through Brooke's recent posts and discovered more lies. Photos of family dinners captioned Sunday tradition at our mountain home. Pictures of Judith's flower arrangements with brightening up our Vermont lodge. A video of Ryan giving a tour of the property, describing renovations they were planning for their family retreat. They'd been systematically creating the impression that the lodge belonged to them, with me as a distant, uninvolved owner who had surrendered control. My research led me down another disturbing path. Ryan had apparently been contacting real estate agents in the area, inquiring about the market value of properties similar to the lodge. Was he planning to pressure me to sell? Or worse, finding ways to force a sale without my consent? By late afternoon, I found myself at the small lake where Grandpa Walter had taught me to fish. I sat on the weathered dock, staring at the water, feeling more lost than I had since his death. The lodge had been my anchor, my connection to him, my refuge from the world. Now it had become a battleground, a source of stress and betrayal. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here today," a gruff voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see an elderly man approaching along the shore, fishing rod in hand. "Mind if I join you?" I gestured to the empty dock, and he settled beside me with a grunt, beginning to prepare his line with practice movements. "You're Walter Wright's granddaughter," he said after a moment. Not a question. "Did you know him?" I asked, unsurprised by now at being recognized. "Frank Miller," he introduced himself. "Your grandfather and I were fishing buddies for 30 years. Stubborn as a mule, but the best friend a man could ask for. Despite everything." I found myself smiling. "That sounds like him. He talked about you all the time," Frank continued, casting his line into the water. "So proud of his Kenzie. Said you were the only one who really understood what that place meant." The casual use of my grandfather's nickname for me brought fresh tears to my eyes. I'm not doing a very good job of protecting it right now. Frank was quiet for a moment, watching his line. Walter used to say that the hardest part of standing your ground is recognizing where that ground is in the first place. What does that mean? Means you can't defend what you're not willing to claim as yours. He glanced at me sidelong. That lodge isn't just a building, girl. It's Walter's legacy. And now it's yours. Standing up for it isn't selfish, it's honoring what he entrusted to you. We sat in companionable silence after that, the gentle lapping of the water against the dock providing a rhythm to my thoughts. Frank's words, so reminiscent of my grandfather's wisdom, settled something within me. The lodge was mine to protect. Not just the physical structure, but the spirit of the place, the values and vision Walter had built into every hand-carved banister and carefully placed stone. By allowing the Bennetts to stay, by retreating in the face of their entitlement, I wasn't being generous or understanding. I was failing my grandfather's trust. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lake, I finally recognized the truth that had been eluding me. This wasn't just about property rights. It was about honoring a legacy, about standing up for what Walter had believed in, about being the caretaker he had trusted me to be. I thanked Frank for his company and wisdom, then walked back to my car with new resolve. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since discovering the Bennetts in my lodge, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I awoke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The helplessness and confusion that had paralyzed me were gone, replaced by a steady determination. This was no longer about avoiding conflict or maintaining peace. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. My first stop was Michael Ross's law office, where I arrived shortly after they opened at 8 a.m. "I've made my decision," I told him, setting my notebook on his desk. "I want to proceed with a formal eviction, but I also want to explore any faster alternatives we might have." Michael's expression turned thoughtful as he leaned forward. "I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Wright. There might be a more expedient approach than a standard eviction." For the next hour, we developed a comprehensive strategy. While a formal eviction notice would be prepared as our baseline legal action, Michael suggested several additional angles that might accelerate the process. "Your brother-in-law's business plans are particularly interesting," he noted, reviewing the social media posts I'd shown him. "They're effectively attempting to operate a commercial venture from a residential property without proper permits or zoning approval. That gives us leverage with the local authorities." Additionally, Michael had done some research on Ryan Bennett's previous business ventures, information that proved both illuminating and concerning. "Your brother-in-law has a history of questionable business practices," he explained, showing me documents from a legal database. 2 failed startups with investor complaints, a pending lawsuit for misrepresentation, and a history of tax issues. Not someone the local business community would welcome with open arms if this information came to light. While I had no desire to destroy Ryan's reputation, the knowledge provided valuable context for understanding what we were dealing with someone with a pattern of overreaching and misrepresenting his position. With Michael's guidance, I developed a 3-pronged approach: legal action through formal eviction proceedings, regulatory pressure through zoning and permit violations, and community alliance by correcting the false narrative the Bennetts had been spreading. Our next stop was the county building inspector's office. Robert Jenkins, a stoic man in his 60s, listened carefully as I explained the unauthorized modifications the Bennetts had been making to my property. "Screwed things into walls, you say? Restructured rooms? And now planning commercial operations?" He frowned, making notes. "None of that sounds permitted to me. Lodge zoning in that area is strictly residential, with specific occupancy limits. Any commercial activity would require rezoning approval, which I guarantee hasn't been granted." Jenkins agreed to conduct an official inspection, which would provide documentation of any code violations and unauthorized modifications documentation that could be used in our legal proceedings. As we left the county offices, my phone rang with a call from Nathan, my boss in Boston. "Mackenzie, how's that break going? Found your zen yet?" His tone was light, but I could hear the concern underneath. "Not exactly," I admitted, then found myself explaining the entire situation. Nathan listened without interruption, and when I finished, his response surprised me. "This is outrageous. And it just so happens that before I went into marketing, I practiced real estate law for 7 years." "You did?" "Cornell Law, class of 2009. Haven't kept up my license, but I still know my way around a property dispute. His voice took on a determined edge. The company has a legal department that owes me several favors. How would you feel about having some corporate legal muscle in your corner? The offer of additional legal support from my company was unexpected but welcome. By early afternoon, Nathan had arranged a conference call with Precision Brand's lead counsel, who promised to review our strategy and provide supplementary resources if needed. With the legal and regulatory aspects of my plan in motion, I turned to the final piece: community alliance. The Bennetts had been spreading a false narrative about their role at the lodge, positioning themselves as caretakers and partners rather than unwelcome occupants. It was time to correct the record. I began by visiting the neighbors closest to the lodge, Frank Miller among them. The conversations were uncomfortable but necessary, as I explained the actual situation and my plans to resolve it. "Never did trust that son-in-law of yours," Frank commented after hearing my story. "Too slick by half. Walter would have seen right through him." "He's not my son-in-law," I corrected automatically, then paused as the distinction suddenly seemed important. "He's my sister's husband, and they violated my trust." "Well, you've got my support," Frank assured me, "and I'll talk to the others in the Lake Association. We don't want commercial operations disturbing the peace around here anyway." By the end of the day, I had spoken with 6 neighboring property owners, all of whom expressed concern about the Bennett's plans and offered their support. Several mentioned interactions with Ryan where he had presented himself as a co-owner or manager of the property, further evidence of misrepresentation. Back at the motel, I took stock of my progress. In just one day, I had initiated formal eviction proceedings, scheduled an official inspection for zoning violations, secured additional legal support from my company, begun correcting the false narrative in the community, gathered evidence of Ryan's misrepresentations. For the first time since discovering the Bennetts in my lodge, I felt a sense of control returning. I was no longer reacting to their actions. I was taking proactive steps to reclaim what was mine. But the day's activities had left me physically and emotionally drained. As I sat on the motel bed, staring at the wall, a wave of grief washed over me, not just for the current situation, but for everything it represented: my fractured relationship with Brooke, the violation of my sanctuary, the betrayal of Walter's legacy. On impulse, I drove to the small cemetery where my grandfather was buried. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grounds as I made my way to his simple headstone. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," I whispered, sitting on the grass beside his grave. "I should have protected the lodge better. I should have seen this coming." The cemetery was quiet except for the rustling of leaves and distant birdsong. I sat there for a long time, remembering Walter's lessons about self-reliance and integrity, about standing up for what matters, and knowing your true north. As the sun began to set, I noticed something partially buried in the grass near the headstone, a small round object reflecting the fading light. Curious, I brushed away the dirt to reveal Walter's old compass, the one he'd always carried on our hikes. Someone, likely the groundskeeper, must have placed it here after finding it among his possessions. The compass was tarnished but still functional, the needle swinging steadily to point north. I remembered Walter placing it in my small hands when I was 10 years old, teaching me how to orient myself in the woods. "Always know your true north, Kenzie," he'd said. "Not just in the forest, but in life. Find the principles that guide you, and you'll never be truly lost." Holding the compass now, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My true north had always been clear: honoring Walter's legacy by preserving the lodge as a sanctuary, a place of peace and natural beauty. The Bennetts threatened everything the lodge represented, not just my ownership of it. I slipped the compass into my pocket, said a quiet goodbye to my grandfather, and returned to the motel with fresh resolve. Tomorrow would be the day I reclaimed my home. That evening, I prepared meticulously for the confrontation ahead. I organized all my documentation, property deeds, tax records, Walter's will, photographs of the lodge before the Bennett's arrival into a comprehensive file. I reviewed the eviction notice Michael had prepared, familiarizing myself with the legal language and requirements. I also prepared myself emotionally, recognizing that tomorrow would likely be painful and difficult, especially regarding Brooke. Our relationship might never recover from this breach of trust, a reality I had to accept even as I mourned it. Before sleep, I called Alana for a final pep talk. "You're doing the right thing," she assured me. "Remember, this isn't about being mean or ungenerous. It's about boundaries and respect." "I know," I sighed. "But it still feels like I'm losing my sister in the process." "You aren't the one who created this situation," Alana reminded me gently. "Brooke made her choices. She prioritized Ryan and his family over honesty and respect for you. Those consequences are on her, not you." As I drifted off to sleep, I held Walter's compass in my hand, a tangible reminder of my purpose. Tomorrow wouldn't be easy, but I was finally ready to stand my ground. The morning of the confrontation dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of my mission. I dressed carefully in professional attire, not my usual casual lodge wear, wanting to project confidence and authority. Walter's compass went into my pocket, a private talisman for the day ahead. My entourage assembled at the Mountain View Diner for a final strategy session. Michael Ross with the legal documentation, Robert Jenkins, the building inspector, with his clipboard and official county vehicle, and Sheriff Tom Patterson, who had agreed to accompany us to ensure the confrontation remained civil. "Remember," Michael advised as we finished our coffee, "stay calm regardless of provocation. We have the law on our side, but emotions can complicate things." "And if they refuse to leave?" I asked, voicing my greatest concern. "Then we proceed with a formal eviction process," he assured me. "But my hope is that faced with official representatives and irrefutable evidence, they'll recognize that continued resistance is futile." At precisely 10 a.m., our small convoy pulled into the lodge driveway. The vehicles were all still there: the silver SUV, the blue pickup, the red sedan, suggesting the entire Bennett clan was present. Perfect. Sheriff Patterson took the lead as we approached the front door, his official presence setting the tone. I stayed half a step behind him, with Michael and Robert flanking me. The look of shock on Ryan's face when he opened the door was almost comical, a fleeting moment of satisfaction in an otherwise tense situation. "What's going on?" he demanded, his gaze moving from the sheriff to me, then to Michael and Robert. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Sheriff Patterson. We're here to address some legal matters concerning this property. May we come in?" Ryan hesitated, clearly calculating his options, before reluctantly stepping aside. "This is harassment," he muttered as we passed. The living room looked even more transformed than when I'd left days earlier. More of my belongings had been moved or replaced, and new furniture I didn't recognize had appeared. The sight strengthened my resolve. "What's happening?" Brooke appeared from the kitchen, followed quickly by Judith, Harold, and Marcus. The entire Bennett family arrayed against me, just as before, but this time, I wasn't alone. "Miss Mackenzie Wright has asked us to assist in resolving a property dispute," Sheriff Patterson explained calmly. "Mr. Ross here is her legal representative." Michael stepped forward, briefcase in hand. "Miss Wright is the sole legal owner of this property. She has not authorized your extended stay here, nor any modifications to the property, nor any business operations based here." "This is ridiculous," Ryan scoffed. "We're family. This is a family dispute that doesn't require legal intervention." "Unfortunately, Mr. Bennett, that's not accurate," Michael continued. "This is a clear case of unauthorized occupation of private property, compounded by numerous zoning violations and false representations to the community." Robert Jenkins stepped forward next. "I'm here to conduct an official inspection regarding reports of unauthorized modifications and commercial activities operating without proper permits or zoning approval." The color drained from Ryan's face as he realized the extent of our preparation. Beside him, Brooke looked frantically between her husband and me. "Mac, please," she began. "We can talk about this." "We're past talking, Brooke," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You've had multiple opportunities to discuss this honestly. Instead, you've lied, manipulated, and attempted to steal what isn't yours." That's a serious accusation, Harold interjected, puffing up his chest. We were invited to stay here. No, you weren't, I countered. Brooke had emergency access only, which she abused. None of you had permission to move in, make changes to the property, or represent yourselves as owners or managers to the community. Michael opened his briefcase and extracted a document. This is a formal notice to vacate the premises immediately. Should you refuse, we are prepared to proceed with a legal eviction, which will include charges for trespassing, property damage, and misrepresentation. Ryan snatched the document, scanning it with growing alarm. This is excessive. We're willing to discuss reasonable accommodations, but there are no accommodations to be made, I interrupted. This is my property, inherited from my grandfather with clear legal documentation. You are leaving today. You can't just throw us out on the street, Judith protested. We have rights. Actually, Mrs. Bennett, Michael explained patiently. As you have no lease agreement and are occupying the property against the owner's wishes, your legal protections are limited. Mrs. Wright has been more than generous in not pressing charges for the damage already done. Robert had begun his inspection, making notes as he examined the unauthorized modifications. Shelves bolted to walls, fixtures replaced, furniture rearranged. These changes all violate the residential code for this district, he commented. And any business operations would require a complete rezoning application, which has not been filed or approved. The Bennett's unity began to fracture as the reality of their situation became clear. Harold and Judith huddled together, whispering urgently. Marcus slouched against the wall, affecting disinterest but clearly concerned. Ryan's expression alternated between anger and calculation, likely assessing whether he had any viable counterplay. It was Brooke who finally broke, tears streaming down her face as she approached me. Mackenzie, please. We made a mistake, but we really do have nowhere else to go. Ryan's business contacts fell through. His parents' condo isn't ready. And that's not my problem. I cut her off, though it pained me to be so harsh. You should have thought about those logistics before invading my home and lying to me repeatedly. We didn't lie, she insisted. Grandpa Walter really did want me to have a place here too. Stop it, Brooke. Walter's will was crystal clear. He left the lodge to me because he knew I would protect and preserve it. You've never cared about this place, except as a convenient solution to your problems. Ryan stepped forward, his demeanor shifting from defiance to negotiation. Look, we got off on the wrong foot here, but maybe we can work something out. A rental agreement, perhaps? We could pay you fair market value. This property is not for rent, I stated firmly. And based on your financial situation and business history, I doubt you could afford fair market value anyway. That struck a nerve. Ryan's face flushed, and beside him, Marcus snorted. Told you this wouldn't work, he muttered to his brother. There's been a misunderstanding, Ryan tried again. We genuinely thought Brooke had authority to— Mr. Bennett, Michael interrupted. Let's not compound the situation with further misrepresentations. We have documentation of your inquiries to real estate agents about the property's value, your false statements to community members about your role here, and your unauthorized business plans using this location. Continuing this path will only worsen your legal position. A heavy silence fell over the room as the Bennetts recognized their defeat. Sheriff Patterson, who had remained a steady, authoritative presence throughout, spoke up. I suggest you folks start packing your belongings. I'll remain on site to ensure the process goes smoothly. For a moment, I thought Ryan might continue to resist, but after exchanging looks with his increasingly anxious family, he gave a curt nod. Fine. We'll need time to pack. You have 4 hours, I replied. Sheriff Patterson and I will stay to supervise. Mr. Jenkins will complete his inspection, and Mr. Ross will draft documentation of your voluntary departure to avoid formal eviction proceedings on your record. As the Bennetts dispersed to begin packing, Brooke lingered, tears still streaming down her face. Can we talk? She asked quietly. Privately? Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain the professional distance I'd established. But despite everything, she was still my sister. 5 minutes, I agreed, following her onto the back porch. Once alone, Brooke's composure crumbled completely. "I'm so sorry, Mac," she sobbed. "This all spiraled out of control. Ryan convinced me it would just be temporary, that you wouldn't mind if you knew, that we'd be gone before you even found out. But you stayed. You invited his entire family. You started making permanent changes. You planned a business. You lied to the community about your role here. Each point landed like a stone between us." "I know," she whispered. "I got caught up in it all. It felt so good to finally have something stable, something beautiful. I've always been jealous of you, you know. Of how Grandpa Walter favored you. Of how you got this amazing place while I got nothing. You got the same opportunities I did," I reminded her. "You chose different paths." "I know that now," she admitted. "But it was easier to blame you, to feel like you had all the advantages." She wiped at her tears. "Ryan kept pushing for more, stay longer, make changes, explore business options. I knew we should talk to you, but I was afraid you'd say no. So you decided to create a situation I couldn't easily undo," I concluded. "A fait accompli." Brooke nodded miserably. "I'm not proud of it. And now I've ruined everything, my relationship with you, our living situation, Ryan's business prospects. Those are the consequences of your choices, Brooke. You prioritized Ryan's schemes over honesty and respect for me and for Grandpa Walter's legacy." "What happens now?" she asked. "Vulnerability, replacing the defiance she'd shown earlier. With us, I mean." I sighed, feeling the weight of our shared history and the uncertain future of our relationship. "I don't know. This breach of trust is significant, Brooke. It can't be fixed with a simple apology." "I understand," she nodded, fresh tears falling. "For what it's worth, I am truly sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for betraying your trust." The sincerity in her voice touched me, despite my armor. "Time will tell if that's true. For now, you need to leave with your husband and his family, and I need space to process everything that's happened." Our conversation ended there, both of us recognizing that deeper healing, if possible at all, would require time and distance. The damage done was too raw, too fresh for easy reconciliation. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Under Sheriff Patterson's watchful eye, the Bennetts packed their belongings, occasionally arguing among themselves about who was responsible for what. Robert Jenkins completed his inspection, documenting numerous code violations that would have been costly to address had the Bennetts proceeded with their business plans. Michael prepared the necessary paperwork to formalize their voluntary departure, avoiding a formal eviction on their record, a small mercy I'd decided to grant despite everything. By mid-afternoon, the lodge was empty of Bennetts and their possessions. I stood in the driveway, watching as they loaded the last of their things into their vehicles. Ryan avoided my gaze entirely, his earlier confidence replaced by simmering resentment. Harold and Judith maintained what dignity they could, nodding stiffly in my direction as they entered their SUV. Marcus seemed almost relieved, as if freed from a scheme he'd never fully supported. Brooke approached me one last time before getting into the red sedan. "I really am sorry, Mackenzie," she said quietly. "I hope someday you can forgive me." I neither promised forgiveness nor rejected the possibility, simply nodding in acknowledgement of her words. Some bridges, once burned, take years to rebuild if they can be reconstructed at all. As the Bennett caravan pulled away from the lodge, Sheriff Patterson clasped my shoulder briefly. "You did the right thing," he said. "Standing up for yourself isn't wrong, even when it's family involved." Michael and Robert departed soon after, their official roles completed. Michael promised to file the necessary documentation and keep me updated on any legal developments, though we both expected the Bennetts to fade away rather than pursue further conflict. And then, suddenly, I was alone. Truly alone, in the lodge for the first time since arriving nearly 2 weeks earlier. The silence was profound after days of tension and confrontation. I moved through the room slowly, cataloging changes and damages, noting what needed to be repaired, replaced, or simply restored to its original state. The evidence of the Bennett's occupation was everywhere: scuff marks on the hardwood floors, a water stain on the coffee table, hooks screwed into walls where my photographs had once hung. But beneath the damage and displacement, the bones of the lodge remained. The stone fireplace Walter had built with his hands, the wooden beams he'd selected and positioned, the windows perfectly placed to capture the morning sun across the lake. In the master bedroom, my bedroom, I stripped the sheets the Bennetts had used and opened the windows wide, letting the mountain air cleanse the space. I ran my hand along the carved headboard, finding comfort in the familiar patterns Walter had etched decades earlier. It would take time to erase all traces of the invasion, to reclaim each space as my own again. But for tonight, it was enough to be back, to sleep in my own bed, to know that the sanctuary was mine once more. As I drifted off to sleep that night, Walter's compass on the nightstand beside me, I felt both victory and loss. I had reclaimed my home but potentially lost my sister in the process. The cost had been high, but necessary. Some principles couldn't be compromised. Some boundaries couldn't be crossed without consequences. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, safe in the knowledge that I had honored my grandfather's legacy and my own truth. The process of restoring the lodge to its former state became a kind of therapy in the weeks that followed. Each repair, each replacement, each restoration was an act of reclaiming not just physical space, but emotional territory as well. I began with the master bedroom, sanding away the scratches Harold and Judith had left on the antique dresser, rehanging the landscape paintings they had removed, retrieving my grandfather's journals from the attic, where they had been carelessly stored. The simple act of making the bed with my own linens, arranging my own belongings on the nightstand, felt like reconsecrating sacred ground. The living room came next. I returned the furniture to its original positions, guided by memory and the faint impressions left in the carpet. The mismatched decorations the Bennetts had scattered throughout were boxed and donated, replaced by the meaningful items I retrieved from storage. Walter's chess set returned to the side table, family photographs restored to the mantel, my collection of river stones arranged in their glass bowl. Physical cleaning paralleled emotional processing. As I scrubbed away water rings from wooden surfaces, I also worked through my feelings about Brooke's betrayal. As I repaired small damages, I examined the damage done to our relationship. As I reclaimed spaces, I reconsidered boundaries that had been too permeable for too long. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I began seeing a therapist in town, Dr. Elena Martinez, a compassionate woman with a straightforward approach that reminded me of Walter. Family patterns are powerful, she observed during our second session. Your role as Brooke's protector and problem solver was established long ago. Breaking that pattern feels like breaking a promise. I've always been the responsible one, I admitted. Even as children, I was the one making sure homework got done, lunches got packed, permission slips got signed when mom was working double shifts, and that role became your identity, Dr. Martinez suggested, making it difficult to establish boundaries without feeling guilty. She was right. Throughout my life, I had prioritized Brooke's needs over my own boundaries, smoothed over her mistakes, cushioned her falls. In many ways, I had enabled the very behavior that led to this crisis, her expectation that I would ultimately accommodate her regardless of her actions. Guilt doesn't mean you're wrong, Dr. Martinez reminded me. It often means you're changing a pattern that others have come to depend on. Parallel to the emotional work, I took practical steps to protect the lodge from future invasions. I changed all the locks, installed a security system, and met with Michael to update my will and create clear legal protections for the property. Consider a trust, he suggested. It would provide an additional layer of protection for the lodge and ensure your wishes for its future are legally binding. I also restructured my work arrangements with Nathan's support. Instead of occasional long weekends at the lodge squeezed between intense work periods, I would spend 1 full week each month in Vermont, working remotely while maintaining the property and connecting with the place that meant so much to me. The Johnson disaster was a wake-up call, Nathan admitted during a video conference. We've been pushing our top performers too hard without adequate recovery time. Your new schedule might become a model for others. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I received a text message from Brooke, the first contact since the Bennett's departure. It was brief. Can we talk? Just us? After careful consideration, I agreed to meet her for coffee in town, choosing neutral territory for this first tentative reconnection. I arrived early, selecting a table by the window where I could watch her approach, gauging her demeanor before she saw me. She looked different, subdued, the frenetic energy that typically surrounded her noticeably absent. She entered the coffee shop alone, without Ryan hovering at her shoulder or speaking for her. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat down, hands wrapped around her mug as if seeking warmth despite the mild day. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of our history and recent conflict hanging between us. "Ryan and I are separating," she finally said, the words tumbling out in a rush. After everything that happened, I started seeing things differently. The way he manipulated the situation, used my insecurities about you and Grandpa Walter, pushed for more and more while ignoring my concerns. I listened without comment, neither celebrating her marital troubles nor dismissing them. "His parents are back in Providence, staying with his uncle until their condo is ready," she continued. "Marcus moved to Boston for a job he actually qualified for, instead of the executive position Ryan kept promising him." "And you?" I asked, my first words since her announcement. "I'm staying with Alicia," she named a college friend I vaguely remembered. "Working at a bookstore downtown while I figure things out. Going to therapy twice a week." "That's good," I said, meaning it. "Therapy has been helpful for me too." Another silence, less awkward than the first. "I don't expect forgiveness," Brooke said finally, meeting my eyes directly. What I did, was wrong on so many levels. I violated your trust, your space, and Grandpa Walter's intentions. I let my jealousy and insecurity override my integrity. The acknowledgement was more than I had expected, suggesting that her therapy was indeed producing insights. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied carefully. "Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild." "I know," she nodded. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm working on the issues that led to it. And I wanted to apologize, properly this time, without excuses or justifications." We talked for another hour, not resolving everything that would take much longer, if it happened at all, but establishing a framework for possible future healing. No promises were made, no instant reconciliation attempted. Just two sisters acknowledging a painful breach and the long road ahead. As summer turned to fall, the lodge became my sanctuary once more, but with a difference. Instead of jealously guarding it as a private retreat, I began selectively sharing it with people who respected its significance and history. Alana came for a long weekend, helping me plant new flower beds that honored Walter's original landscaping vision while adding my own touches. Nathan and his partner visited during peak foliage season, their appreciation for the property's natural beauty validating my efforts to preserve it. Frank Miller became a regular visitor, stopping by to fish or simply sit on the porch and share stories about Walter that I had never heard, small moments and conversations that added new dimensions to my understanding of my grandfather. "He worried about you sometimes," Frank confided one crisp October afternoon. "Thought you might work yourself into an early grave like your father did. Always hoped this place would teach you to slow down, notice the world around you." The observation hit home. In my determination to succeed, to be responsible, to never need rescuing like Brooke did, I had indeed mirrored my father's driving work ethic. The burnout that had sent me to the lodge initially wasn't an anomaly. It was the inevitable outcome of a pattern Walter had recognized long before I did. In late October, almost exactly 6 months after discovering the Bennetts in my lodge, I received another text from Brooke. "I found something of Grandpa's that should be with you," it read. "Can I drop it off?" I agreed, curious about what she might have discovered. She arrived the following day, standing uncertainly on the porch steps rather than assuming welcome access as she once would have. "I found this while going through some old boxes," she explained, handing me a manila envelope. "Mom had it in storage. I never opened it." Inside was a letter addressed to me in Walter's distinctive handwriting, dated just weeks before his death. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the pages, Brooke watching silently. "My dear Kenzie," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone, and the lodge is now in your care. You may wonder why I chose you as its guardian when your sister might feel equally deserving. The truth is simple. You understand what this place is meant to be. Not a possession to exploit or change, but a sanctuary to preserve." Tears welled in my eyes as I continued reading. Walter had indeed considered both his granddaughters, weighing his decision carefully. But he had recognized in me a kindred spirit, someone who valued the lodge not for what it could provide or become, but for what it already was, a place of peace, of connection to nature, of simple living and quiet wisdom. "The greatest gift is not in owning something," the letter concluded, "but in caring for it properly. You have always understood this, Kenzie. The lodge is yours not because I loved you more, but because you loved the lodge for what it truly is." I looked up from the letter to find Brooke watching me, her own eyes bright with tears. "He was right," she said softly. "I never saw the lodge the way you do. I always thought about how it could be improved, updated, utilized. I never just appreciated it for what it was." The moment marked a turning point in our healing process. Not complete reconciliation, but a deeper understanding of Walter's decision and the different ways we had related to his legacy. As winter approached, I continued the work of reclaiming and restoring both the physical lodge and my own sense of purpose. I maintained clearer boundaries with work, with Brooke, with everyone in my life. I honored Walter's vision while allowing myself to make thoughtful changes that enhanced rather than altered the lodge's essential character. The security system remained active, the new locks unchanged. Trust, once broken, required more than apologies to restore, but I no longer felt the same raw pain when thinking of the betrayal. It had become a lesson rather than an open wound. On the anniversary of Walter's death, I hosted a small gathering at the lodge. Alana, Nathan, and his partner, Frank and his wife, and, after careful consideration, Brooke. We shared memories of Walter, laughed at his notorious stubbornness, marveled at his craftsmanship visible in every corner of the lodge. As we sat around the fireplace that evening, the flames casting warm light across faces both familiar and becoming familiar again, I recognized the true legacy Walter had left me. Not just a physical property, but a philosophy. That generosity comes not from endless accommodation, but from clear boundaries. That caring for something means sometimes saying no to those who would change it. That knowing your true north, your core principles and values, provides direction even in the darkest woods. To Walter, Frank raised his glass in toast, who built more than just a lodge. To Walter, we echoed, Brooke's eyes meeting mine across the circle with newfound understanding. Later, standing on the porch alone after everyone had gone to bed, I watched the moonlight on the lake and felt Walter's presence in the crisp night air. The lodge was more than wood and stone, more than property or inheritance. It was an embodiment of principles worth defending, a physical manifestation of knowing what matters and standing firm to protect it. Some might call my actions selfish, choosing property over family accommodation. But I had come to understand that true generosity isn't found in surrendering boundaries, but in maintaining them with compassion and clarity. The lodge would always be a sanctuary, but one protected by the wisdom that not all doors should remain unlocked, not all access freely given without respect for what lies within. In reclaiming my grandfather's legacy, I had discovered my own strength, not just in confrontation, but in the daily choices to honor what matters, to know my true north, to recognize when compromise becomes surrender. The lodge stood solid behind me, a testament to Walter's craftsmanship and vision, and I stood solid before it, a testament to the lessons he had taught me, lessons about self-reliance, clear boundaries, and the courage to defend what matters, even against those we love. So what about you? Have you ever had to choose between maintaining your boundaries and accommodating family? How do you balance family loyalty with self-care and personal boundaries? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and life lessons. Remember, knowing your true north isn't selfish, it's the only way to navigate life's most challenging terrains with integrity. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you in the next video.